Hello again. My name is Jim Wade. I'm a tax attorney here in Maine, and I'm going to be talking about the 5 traps to avoid an innocent spouse. This is going to be my final posting, at least for present, about innocent spouse. And while I've talked about what innocent spouse can do for you, it's always helpful to tell you about things you want to avoid. So either to avoid in advance of requesting innocent spouse, or a good reason why you may not want to do innocent spouse at all. So without further ado, let's get started. So here are the 5 traps. It's not all of them, there's more than that, but here's the 5 big ones. And that's transferring assets, receiving a significant benefit, not keeping in tax compliance, relying on the divorce judgment, and finally, that there's better options out there than innocent spouse. Talk about the first one, transfer of assets. So you may otherwise qualify for innocent spouse relief, but to the extent that you receive transfers of assets as either part of a fraudulent scheme or with intent to avoid tax or payment of tax, you may be denied relief altogether or only receive partial relief. A fraudulent scheme is usually where you and the spouse are trying to, I guess, lack of a better word, screw creditors, including the Internal Revenue Service, where you're hiding assets, you're lying about assets, things along those lines. You could lose the right to claim innocent spouse relief. I shouldn't say right. You lose the ability to qualify for relief. Just be aware that transfers made right before or during a divorce are treated as highly suspect. It may be that you have, no fraud intended at all from transferring assets, but just be careful when you're transferring assets as part of preparing for divorce or going through divorce. Those may be a transaction you're going to have to do some splaining to do, as the cool kids say. Then there's also transfers with an intent to avoid tax or payment of tax. This one, you can do transfers without an intent to engage in fraud, but to put them out of the way of creditors, including the IRS. So I know it's probably to you a distinction without a difference, but at least legally speaking, there are ways that you could transfer assets with an intent to avoid tax or payment of tax that would put you into this category. Just be careful of transfers between spouses a year before the tax is assessed, because those are presumed to be done with an intent to avoid. Now, presumptions can be overcome by other evidence, but just be aware they are a suspect transaction. Right. Significant benefit. So when we talked about innocent spouse in previous posts, I said, look, you've got this erroneous item or underpayment of tax that is the responsibility, generally speaking, of the other spouse. But in addition to that, if you can show that, hey, it's the other spouse's responsibility, you also have to show that it would be inequitable to hold you liable. And one of the things that the IRS is going to look into is, did you receive a significant benefit from either the underpayment of tax or the understatement of tax? Significant benefits is something more than getting normal support from that spouse. It's something over and above that. So a lavish or extravagant lifestyle would be the best way to say it. So if you're receiving jewelry, home furnishings, home improvements, things, cars, trucks, and toys, such as boats, snowmobiles, motorcycle, those kinds of things. Vacations overseas or to fancy places here in America. I don't think that taking a trip to visit the in-laws would count under that category, but something more than. And finally, private schooling for children. Those could be considered significant benefit. So if you, as the non-liable spouse, receive a significant benefit, you will likely not obtain relief under innocent spouse. So you have to be very careful about that. I know it seems a bit unfair, but it would generally speaking, the IRS doesn't want the other spouse to divest themselves of their assets by essentially giving it away, and then have everything and all the liability tagged to them, and no one else who received, sort of the benefits from that, not paying their taxes, to sort of get away scot-free. It's just sort of a balancing act. Unfortunately, if you receive a significant benefit, you will not likely receive innocent spouse relief. Tax compliance. We oftentimes will meet with people who have had something very traumatic in their life, which was sort of as a result of this, dealing with a spouse or former spouse, that resulted in this liability they're seeking to have removed. And often, their life will be kind of screwed up. Maybe they lose their job as a result, or they can't keep a job. Their finances are in a terrible state. They're not paying their bills. They're not filing their returns. And that can be a factor held against you. So it's not that the IRS doesn't take pity on you for what happened in your life, but what they want to see is that as part of looking into whether to grant you relief, what have you done now? Are you filing your returns on time and paying any taxes due? If you are, that is a factor that favors you for obtaining relief. If you do not, there's a series of factors. They're not supposedly granted any more weight than others, but I put this out here because if you are not in tax compliance, you are going to find it hard for the IRS to grant you relief. Maybe you win when it goes to trial at the United States Tax Court, but that's a lot of time and money that you could avoid if you sort of get right with the world. If you haven't filed and paid your taxes, do it. If you can't pay your taxes in full, at least file those on time. Show that you're trying to get into compliance. All right. Divorce judgment. I've had a number of people come to me waiving a divorce judgment, saying the other spouse agreed to take on full liability, and so they think it's a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is not. It is just an indication that the other spouse is liable, and it'll be a sort of way in your favor, but it's not determinative, meaning it's not a win. I have had people who very upset about that. At least by watching this video, you understand that it's important to get the divorce judgment to allocate the tax debt so that at least it's clearly laid out who's responsible for what, but it's not binding on the IRS. It's helpful, but it's not binding. So just something to keep in mind. And finally, there may be better options that are available. Innocent spouse, as you've seen from the previous videos, there are a bunch of hurdles you've got to jump over to get it. There may be other options that are better, either less expensive, less time consuming, or just generally don't require you to, maybe you know a little bit about what the other spouse did. So it may be a better option because you may not qualify for innocent spouse. So for example, you may qualify for the offer in compromise. We shorten it to OIC, but an offer in compromise, that legal debt settlement you hear on the radio or TV ads all the time, that may be possible. It may be that the amount of debt that you could possibly get relief from under innocent spouse still leaves you with a significant tax liability. Whereas an offer, you might be able to settle it for less than that. So one of the things a good attorney will look into is, hey, okay, maybe you qualify for innocent spouse. Let's see what else you qualify for to see which one may be the best option. Bankruptcy is another option, as well as hardship status. Those are just the three that really came off the top of my head. I won't go into each of them. Just understand there may be better options out there where you could get relief quicker, or you could get relief that is, more advantageous to you than to request an innocent spouse. Or there may be some cases where innocent spouse may be out of reach. Getting into this other option may get you a similar result without having to go through sort of I guess you could say the obstacle course of innocent spouse relief. All right. With that, if you have any questions, certainly give us a call. We are happy to go through looking at whether you qualify or not for innocent spouse. So with that, I hope you enjoyed this innocent spouse series of videos. We'll be starting a new series next week, likely on IRS levies. Those are those asset seizures you hear about. So with that, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon.